Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the IURC. We're here today to hear from CenterPoint. The storm named Blair specifically caused some significant problems in the state of Indiana, although highly isolated at the same time. And we're anxious to hear your assessment at CenterPoint of what went wrong, what went right, steps moving forward, things that could potentially go better. With us today here in the IURC court is the Office of the Utility Consumer Counselor. This is an informal dialogue, and I would encourage Bill and Anthony, if you guys have any questions, feel free to jump in. Commissioners, same here, informal, and I'll turn it over to CenterPoint now to make any opening statements that you would like to make and then start the presentation, and I hope that you'll be able to allow for us to ask questions during the presentation. Thank you.
Yeah. Good morning, commissioners and Councilor Fine and staff. Let me just start by thanking everyone for kind of taking us up on our offer to come up and talk about the storm, the impact, and to your point, what we think went well and what we can work on to improve. I wanted to also mention, our team appreciated the communication and support that the IRC team provided throughout the event. It was very helpful. So this morning, Shane and I are prepared to walk through some statistics and experiences that we had in the event, and we look forward to your questions along the way. Let me begin by taking you back in time to Sunday, January 5th, and the hours just before that. As the forecast shifted and snow began to fall around 5 a.m. that day, it began to crystallize to our teams that this was going to be a significant event. Ultimately, by Monday morning, we had significant snowfall, a 1/2 to 3/4 inch of ice, some rain, and strong wind, along with frigid temperatures. You can see from these Weather Service maps the impact of what turned out to be the worst ice storm in our service territory in some 15 years. Sub-freezing temperatures all week prevented the ice from melting and contributed to a very difficult operating condition, which you'll hear more about this morning. Our teams were in contact on Sunday and early Monday morning with many external stakeholders. I think, looking back, we think that really helped ensure that local and state leaders understood the severity of the storm and of this weather event. And on the ice itself, I would mention too, I think we saw pockets, right, where the ice was a little less, pockets where the ice was a little more even than what these maps would indicate.
Mr. Rader, may I ask a question at this point?
Yeah.
Please, thank you. What were you seeing? Does your service territory, I should know this, but I don't have a map of Illinois or Missouri. Does your territory go into any of Illinois, Kentucky?
It does not.
It does not, okay. I noticed that your last bullet point talks about the city of Evansville and Vanderburgh County issuing an emergency. What was happening, or are you aware of what was happening to the west as far as the weather conditions and what those cities and counties were doing as far as a state of an emergency, which would trigger something? It would trigger additional actions. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think I would answer that by saying, we were at that time, we were having internal team calls, which included our own internal meteorologist who was providing us kind of real-time updates on what he was seeing in the region.
But we were seeing what was going to happen here on the 5th. Is that correct?
Yeah, correct. We definitely began to see things crystallizing on the 5th.
Any reason why maybe a state of emergency wasn't declared, and why a state of emergency was declared on the 6th and not the 5th or the 4th? Because wouldn't that have triggered something, a response from you, if you would have had a state of emergency on the 5th or the 4th? Or not? I don't know.
Yeah, I'm thinking back on my own memory about that, and certainly a valid point. I think, these ice lines move, constantly.
Right.
And so, again, I don't want to speak for the city of Evansville or Vanderburgh County or any of the other counties, but, I think we were waiting to see what really actually hit the ground because there was rain initially, right? I mean, there was some snow. I remember being in our Evansville building on that Sunday morning, and I was seeing all the conditions right there on the river, and so I think it was just a combination of watching like meteorological evidence combined with what we were actually seeing and what our crews ultimately had to work through.
Do I remember correctly that this storm was predicted 4, 5, maybe even 6 days in advance, along with the sub-zero temperatures?
I do recall the temperatures for sure.
I remember correctly that, we knew that this was going to be, at least from a temperature standpoint, substantial cold for several days in a row.
I definitely agree. On the temperature side, I think the precip, it was just a little bit of uncertainty about what,
Sure, where it was going to flow,
right.
where it was going to land, north or south, or those things. Those things can fluctuate, and I understand that. So, well, thank you, Mike. I appreciate it.
Not to interrupt the line of questioning, but perhaps your presentation may explain some of the temperature variances too, because there's temperatures when rain happens, there's temperatures when snow happens, and there's temperatures when ice actually forms. If you can help us in that part of the explanation too, Mike. Thank you.
Yeah, for sure. And I think in a couple of slides that you'll see some photos that will really maybe illustrate some of those conditions even better, if that's okay. And kind of to Commissioner Bennett's point, our preparation communication really began on January 3rd as we started a regular cadence of media and employee communications and customer communications. I think one of the things we learned that preparation time was valuable as we were able to check in with local county EMA and elected officials. We all train and prepare for these kind of events for our various roles and responsibilities, reacting to operational needs, conditions in the field, and I think those early pre-January 5th conversations helped reassure us that our external partners were ready as well. So those conversations with particularly the county EMA folks, just reinforcing where were they going to be, where were our team going to be stationed, making sure everybody, again, we drill for all this, but in the moment, things can get a little jumbled. And so making sure they've got the right cell phone numbers, making sure that, the EMA folks, are they talking to the county commissioners? Are we talking to county commissioners? Those kinds of conversations before the 5th, I think were very helpful. And so I think you'll hear that theme really throughout the conversation today. The cross-functional, so really those calls kind of fed our internal team meetings that we were having in this time period, and then it also allowed us to begin sort of our cross-functional calls internally to not only hear sort of business unit updates, so operations, marketing, communications, emergency operations, government affairs. All these different groups were meeting cross-functionally. And as the storm hit, we also began working with the community to identify staff and support and supply community warming centers, as that became apparent that was going to be a need.
Mike, I have a question about mutual assistance. So, as you see an event like this unfolding, and you're kind of waiting to see what areas get hit, do you have conversations with other utilities about the potential for mutual assistance? I mean, knowing that someone, it looked like, was going to get ice, and it just happened, and you got it. It could have been Duke. I mean, other areas could have gotten hit. So can you kind of explain that process before the event happens? And then later, I think you have some slides. It looks like we're going to talk about how the actual mutual assistance happens after the event when you're in the recovery part.
That's right. And if it's okay, I probably would ask Shane to answer that question.
Yeah, thank you for the question. make sure you can hear me well enough on there. So, yeah, we do have conversations with some of our Indiana peer utilities. We do not typically engage into the mutual assistance until we see a definite need. Utilities around our surrounding area, they're looking at the same things we're looking at. And so they're trying to determine if they have crews available and if they will release them. So we do have initial conversations to say, hey, can we get crews? And they may say, if we don't get the weather that you guys are going to get, or vice versa, then we can commit this many crews. But we do have some of those initial upfront conversations.
And so with ice being the issue this time versus like a windstorm or something, does that make it limiting with getting crews to the area, or how does that factor in?
Yeah, that's a big factor. So to maybe elaborate a little bit on Commissioner Bennett's question as well, we start looking at this. We knew the weather was coming, right? But we didn't know what the magnitude was going to be. We were right on that line between rain, ice, and snow. So we were continuing to look at that. We had started our meteorologist cadence calls around that time on Thursday to try to get some kind of magnitude of what the ice accumulation was going to be. And we look at our own internal meteorologists. We look at NOAA. We talk to our local meteorologists. We have another group that we use, Storm Geo, that we have a call with on a routine basis. And we were getting a range between 1/8 all the way up to 3/4 of an inch. So it was kind of really hard to determine what kind of magnitude of ice we were going to get. But let me continue on to my presentation and talk, because we did go ahead and know, because of the intensity of the ice that we forecasted, that we would need to pre-stage some crews ahead of time and have them in on site and in travel before the ice got to us.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I have a couple of questions as well. I'll ask both of them, and you can figure out who's going to answer which one. First, with respect to the ratio of line to vegetation management crews, is there a standard for that? Did these numbers get selected based on the weather you were anticipating? And it's one question with multiple parts and then a second question. And then, like, if you had known it was going to be ice instead of snow, or, if you'd known it was going to be ice, basically, does it change? I guess I'm trying to figure out how your expertise plays into that. And then the second question, just because you said NOAA, Shane, and this doesn't relate specifically to this case, but with the cuts we just saw in NOAA, which is an unsung hero, I believe, in our human survival, actually. But what are you doing going forward for severe weather events if we aren't maybe able to rely on NOAA for what we've become accustomed to? Thanks.
Yeah, thank you for the questions. To answer your first question, when we looked at this initially, we said, hey, we don't know the magnitude of what this ice is going to bring. We do know that any weather-related situation can cause customer impact as far as outages. And when we know we get up a 1/4 inch or higher, that it can cause additional customer outages. So we said, hey, let's consider what we've done in the past, not with the 2009 ice storm, but recently. Let's assume we're going to have 30,000 customers out, and here's what we usually use as a standard crew from a lineman and vegetation crew, and let's bring them in, pre-stage them early. As far as NOAA, I don't have a good answer to that question. I would tell you that's one of the reasons I think that we, maybe it's an afterthought, but we brought in our own meteorologists to kind of look at this and help guide us from all of our service territories on what that weather impact could be as a forecast precursor.
But you have your own people
Yes.
accessible and on staff when other resources aren't or may not be available.
Yeah, we recently, this past year, hired a meteorologist to put on staff. Yep. Yeah, I'm sorry, and we do have on contract Storm Geo, which I mentioned earlier, that we do routine cadence calls as we see severe weather coming in. So as Mike mentioned, our operational team, even though we started our cadence calls with the meteorologist prior to the storm, we did start meeting early on as an operational team as well. We met on Friday prior to Winter Storm Blair to discuss logistics in anticipation of the approaching weather. We reviewed our potential plans for contract crews, material availability, lodging, food service, anything we could do to be prepared. By Saturday, we secured approximately 200 internal and external linemen and vegetation personnel scheduled to report on site midday Sunday ahead of the storm, with an additional 440 personnel on standby should we need them. Restoration efforts began Sunday afternoon and continued into the night. However, the freezing rain just kept persisting. Customer outages escalated, with some customers who had been restored earlier that day experiencing new outages that night. During our evening operations, we escalated our response to a level 3 response, mobilizing additional company personnel for restoration duties. However, by 4:45 a.m. on Monday, the number of customers peaked at 61,244. And that, therefore, we increased our response to a level 2, bringing in more resources. As illustrated in the images on the next slide, and on later slides, the significant ice accumulation and high winds resulted in conductor damages across our entire service footprint from all corners of it, primarily due to falling trees and broken branches. Thankfully, less than 1% of our poles and transformers were required replacement. By pre-staging personnel on Sunday, we were able to initiate restoration efforts and conduct damage assessments promptly. And with additional support arriving on Monday afternoon and Tuesday morning, we deployed an additional 400 personnel, including assistance from our Indiana peer utilities and mutual assistance. By noon on Tuesday, we had restored 50% of affected customers and 65% by 10 p.m. that evening. By Wednesday, we had mobilized approximately 1,000 personnel from 6 states, including crews from our Texas cohorts, and it successfully restored power to 95% of customers by 10 p.m., and then crews continued their diligent work on Thursday, achieving 99% of restoration by the end of the day, finishing up with a few hundred customers on Friday and then a few final customers that had to be restored on Saturday.
Shane, so does the request for mutual aid, did that start happening on Monday once you got out and assessed, or was that on Tuesday?
That initial request went out first thing Monday morning.
Was that at the 4 a.m. time frame that you indicated you escalated things to a different level?
That was right around that time. It occurred around 6 a.m. Yeah.
6 a.m. And Shane, on that slide, how many utilities were actually helping you with mutual assistance?
Well, that's a great question. I don't know that I have that particular number, but I can tell you all of our Indiana peer utilities. We had some cooperatives from Bowling Green, and we had a lot of contractors from other states. We only showed 4 states up there, but we actually had 6 or 7 states. We had Ohio, Illinois, on top of our Indiana peers on the states that are shown in that slide.
And help us understand, too, we've obviously had hearings with respect to other weather events with other utilities that had to go through the Great Lakes Mutual Assistance. Is that how all of the contact with the mutual aid developed, or was there direct contact from you to other utilities?
Our mutual aid call went out to the Great Lakes Mutual Assistance Program, and they take a look at that. And if they can handle the mutual assistance within that footprint, then they will. But if they can't, then they go out to a greater mutual assistance program to get additional support. However, we did make calls to other utilities, and we got calls coming in from other contractors offering their services as well.
At some point, I think it would be helpful for the commission to have some isolated data on how many people from which utilities actually helped you in response. And I know that you would aggregate that at some point, but could you please provide that to us afterward?
Absolutely. We have that information. This slide and the next slide shows the extent of the damage, which necessitated numerous vegetation management needs for access as well as repairs.
Shane, I apologize. I'm stopping you in the middle of your sentence, but that looks like more than 3/4 of an inch of ice to me. Can you?
Yeah, when we talked to our meteorologist, we just got an estimate, so it's a 1/2 inch to 3/4. But we do know that we experienced more than 3/4 in some areas. We experienced some ice up to an inch in some areas.
Did gravity cause problems with the, I mean, those transformers and lines in that middle picture look like there's significantly more than an inch of ice on there. Now, maybe perspective, can you tell me what your line people and repair crews were encountering?
Sure. Yeah, the ice, just the weight of the ice on the lines as well as the trees. I mean, that's what caused a lot of the trees to topple over, right? And the branches to break. It's just the weight of the ice on the lines. Plus, we experienced 30-mile-an-hour gust winds that didn't help, that keep the lines in place, causing a wave and breaking some of the lines. So, our linemen were experiencing a lot of hazardous conditions. To actually get out there and facilitate these repairs. We had one lineman with the CenterPoint in Houston actually slip on the ice and break an ankle, and we had one of our vegetation contractors had a branch break off and hit him in the head. Fortunately, they had their first line of defense with their hard hat on, but received several sutures. So it is very dangerous work trying to get out there and try to manage through this ice storm.
Shane, the bottom right-hand picture on the previous page, slide 6.
Yeah.
How is the coordination between you and I don't know if this was in the city or if this is outside the incorporated limits, but is it first on the scene, first clears the scene, or you understand? I mean, some of this should be the responsibility of the city or the county, but I understand that you can't just sit there and wait.
That's correct. It's a collaboration. So, sometimes the EMA or other support will come out and help us to clear those. Other times we can't wait, right? We have to restore our customers as soon as we possibly can. So we dispatch our vegetation crews out there to get access to the lines or help get off the line so we can do our work.
Okay, thank you.
And really just maybe a additional perspective there, perhaps an advantage to being a small geographical footprint, the coordination and the communication between those county EMA folks coming into our operations team, being able to, kind of walk down the hall and share with operations. I think that was a pretty helpful exercise.
Do you have a sense, gentlemen, did you clear 80% of those types of situations, or was it a 50-50? How? It seems like you probably have quite a bit more personnel and resources available to you than what the county or the city may have.
Sure. No, I don't have any type of statistic to share with you on how much we did versus how much they did. A lot of what they did were to respond to emergencies. So if they had somebody in a house that needed to get out, they would be responding to that, and we would be coordinating with them.
I have a picture of the house is probably destroyed or partially destroyed with that. I saw.
Yeah.
So they've got their lane, so to speak, and you've got yours.
Yeah, but it's still a collaboration. There's times where we're working together to clear out something to help us get into it. If they have the resources and we can't get the veg crews there in time, then they'll help us to try to get our access to get customers back in.
I'm glad to hear about that coordination. Yeah. Thank you.
Yep.
Mr. Chairman, may I ask a brief question?
Councilor Fine.
Mike, I wanted to clarify something on page 5 of your slide deck. You had 200 personnel who began assessing damage and responding to outages on Monday. I'm guessing that reflects an all-hands-on-deck, that all of your resources were thrown into the problem at that time?
I'll defer to Shane with that.
Yeah, so that 200 personnel is just the linemen and the vegetation management crew. But yes, it is all hands-on, rolling up our sleeves, trying to work. So when we instituted that level 3, it was to inform people by Monday morning that they needed to report to their storm restoration duties. And when we went to level 2, that's indicating that we may need to pull in outside resources within the company. We use our gas crews to help with some of our coordination. We brought in people from Houston to help with some of our coordination. So that's the difference between those two levels.
The initial 200 were local staff?
The initial 200 was our internal lineman crews, what we call native line crews that we use, and then we also brought in external crews, contracted crews as well to support that.
On Monday?
On Sunday. We actually pre-staged those 200 on Sunday.
What I'm trying to do is break down what kind of a crew you staff regularly, which would probably be the 200, and then the 400, the 1,000. Does that involve contractors and outside assistance?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the clarification. Yeah, so we have about 15 crews, and which is about 60 linemen. So when you're looking at that 200, that's about 60 of our folks right there. And then when we look at vegetation crews, that's about 2 full-time equivalents per crew. So that's how when we look at that. When we say, let me look at the slide real quick. Go back to the slide. When we said we had 40 line crews, there was 15 of those were ours. The other 25 were external that we brought in.
Is that the usual staffing level you have, or are you having trouble hiring people, or is this on the high end or the low end historically?
That's the normal staffing level we keep. It's we do manage with outside contract crews as well, but we typically, this is a once in a long-term storm that we're dealing with, and so that's when we have blue sky days, we're able to manage our blue sky days with what we have normally with the 15 crews and some of our native contract crews.
Thank you.
Yeah.
What's your tree trimming cycle currently?
We trim on a 5-year annual cycle, 20%.
And when the storm occurred, what year were you at in terms of the cycle?
Well, we roughly do 20% annually. So I don't know I'll have to get that for you, Commissioner Ziegler, because if I understand your question, we're over on I'm trying to remember how many miles of line we have, but when we do that 20%, we look at circuits, and we take those circuits, and we do that circuit once every 5 years, basically.
I'm going to follow up on Commissioner Ziegler's question. I wanted to know this anyway, and I wasn't sure when I was going to ask it, so might as well ask it now. When you have a storm like this with the significant, number of trees being down, do you look at it, the location of those relative to where you are in the cycle, compare, make any adjustments? Does that data get factored into anything?
That's a great question.
And if not, will it be in the future?
Yeah, that's
right. No, I'm sorry.
I think that's my answer right there. We currently, when we're doing this restoration work, we're hands-on trying to get people restored. So the question I've asked is, how much of this is in the right-of-way from a vegetation standpoint, and how much of it is out of the right-of-way? We currently don't track that even on a blue sky day, and we're going to try to do a better job. But to answer how we can maybe possibly address going forward, we want to look at it. We want to look at it proactively, but we also want to use predictive modeling going forward to help analyze it. And if our peers in CenterPoint in Houston have some software now that they're looking at, and we're just now trying to explore if that's beneficial, that uses satellite imagery. And if we can use that to predictively model, some cycles may be 3 years, some may be 4, some may be 6, depending on the type of vegetation. But if we can do that, that maybe help us perform, our vegetation in a more constructive manner to where we're more reliable. Yeah. So, yeah, I'm just trying to remember where we're at here. So.
We're on slide 6, I think.
Yep. Yeah. So this is just an illustration just showing how we typically prioritize the way we address our outages, impacting the largest customers first. So we start with our transmission substation and then work our way down to our individual outages. However, when needed, we do divert crews to restore critical infrastructure that poses immediate life-threatening risk or can significantly disrupt other services like water, water treatment and other things like that. To give you an example, I was involved with this. We had a call come in from a nursing home to our contact center, and that nursing home has a backup generator that was down and needed repair. And they had called on I think it was maybe Tuesday or Wednesday when they called, and asked if there was anything we could do. And we looked at it. We already had crews right in that area, so we pulled those crews off of the job they were on and to make sure we could get that nursing home back in service. Even though we've had a lot of conversation on this, this timeline packages together how the restoration process progressed. illustrating the commendable efforts of our CMP linemen and those other Indiana colleagues and contractors. However, what I haven't really acknowledged is the equally vital work of our support personnel behind the scenes. It does truly take a village to coordinate logistics, onboard crews, package and stage materials, conduct damage assessments, coordinate the non-local field crews, collaborating with the EMA and local state offices like Mike mentioned, as well as ensuring customer contact is readily available, and then keeping up with customers by informing them of the outages through various communication channels. I'm going to turn it over to Mike now.
As I think you've heard some here, our team worked hard to make this event as transparent as possible, using multiple channels. And so this slide I fully recognize is busy, but I do want to maybe call out 2 or 3 items on here to illustrate some of this. Our communication and marketing teams provided significant support using social media posts and visuals that I think helped impacted customers understand the difficult working conditions that we were seeing and the field crews were working in. We provided media briefings in the field to allow the media to help tell the story to customers. Our communication team posts from the field also allowed the community to feel the impact, especially in those early hours when any travel in the region was difficult to be. One of the early communication messages that we blanketed that I do think was maybe in the moment not well received, but I do think it helped with this the duration of the event. We went out pretty much first hours with a message of please prepare for a multi-day outage, right? The teams were still doing assessments. We didn't know at that moment how many days, but we wanted to make sure people understood if you're out, you may be out for more than just, a few hours. And so, again, that was a hard message to deliver early, but I think, hindsight, I would look back and say that was an important message so people could make plans, whether that was the warming centers or perhaps they went to stay with family and friends. Some we know went to a hotel. So, people made some adjustments to their lives to kind of work along with us as the event continued to unfold. Our marketing team efforts communicated directly with email updates, and you see, again, it's too small to see, but the 2 on the right are examples of the email communication that would have gone directly to our customers in Southwest Indiana.
Mike, if you could help us understand some of the issues surrounding communications with customers when their power is out, and how effective those communications could be with folks who no longer have electricity. Are they, how many of them have a computer? How many of them have a telephone that still has a battery charge at that point? Do you have any way of being able to tell us how effective the communications were on the customer side?
Difficult, I think, to maybe quantify that directly, but I think we know that, again, using social media combined with the cooperation of particularly the local TV stations and radio stations, frankly, to make sure people were getting that message out about prepare for extended outages. The other, I think, anecdotal feedback as we were moving around in the field, if you were out and still in your home, oftentimes those customers were coming out and talking to our crews, right? They saw them across the street. Hey, how long? Thank you. We got a lot of thank yous, right? I mean, people knew the difficult working conditions that these men and women were operating in. And I think that was, at least what I observed, that was perhaps the one-off communications that people were able to see. And so I don't know I have a better way to quantify that, but sort of the media plus the anecdotal interaction with our crews.
In some of those media interviews, were they conducted alongside with municipal and county leadership?
I'm trying to remember an example. Oftentimes Shane and I partnered in the field with a lot of those interviews. I don't recall that we actually had any elected officials alongside us. Certainly, they were being asked separately by the press questions about the restoration, but I don't believe we actually had them with us at any of our events. I think that those email updates also really helped help customers kind of take the journey with our field employees as we were sharing these photos that some of which we've shared this morning. The other lesson that I think we really learned through this, in addition to calls with the commission team, we really appreciated the interaction with the State Emergency Operations Center. The local EMA folks obviously have been trained on how to do this. I didn't have a lot of experience with that, so you really appreciated the commission staff helping. We were providing frequent, localized outage numbers to a number of external stakeholders, and we worked hard to communicate those to local elected officials as well. The piece where we probably had the most consistent interaction with the elected offices where we did some conference calls throughout the event where we invited local, state, and federal offices. We had a couple of, you can imagine, new Congressman Messmer's office being involved, Senator Banks' office, I recall, dialing in. So it provided us an opportunity to share sort of a consistent message. It allowed them to feel like they were getting real-time information. We were, of course, having multiple one-off conversations by telephone, but these conference calls provide kind of a snapshot in time. Everybody got the same information. I think that ultimately was helpful.
Mike, were these happening daily, twice a day, once a day, every other day? How often were you having these interactions, at least from a media or an announcement type of situation?
So they were multiple. So we tried to quantify. I think we were suggesting we did sort of 10 media interviews that were planned, right? But then there were a number of one-off where, for example, Noah, who's in the audience with us today, he may have done some one-off interviews. He certainly did a number of social media posts where he was in the field sharing what he was seeing in a way that customers could relate. The conference, I would say Commissioner Bennett, the elected official and county EMA communication was hourly. We have a couple of team members that, especially during a storm situation, that becomes their primary job, right? That they are and it's well understood and drilled that the EMA folks know that they are to call this person, and this person knows to interact with that, and so that was happening in the background all the time. But the official conference calls, we only did one of those like midday on Tuesday, midday on Wednesday. We offered them again on Thursday, but the interest really began to wane as the operations team began to really get 60, 70, 80% of folks back on.
I think I know what a field media briefing is, but you've listed here 3 field media briefings. Describe that real quickly for me.
Yeah, at least in our context, well, really, I think maybe Shane did a couple of them on his own, but it was Shane and I working with corporate communications to identify where some crews were, where we could safely get out there, and we invited the press to be there. And basically, it was you could also call it a news conference, just out in the field.
Did you see the local media using your 12 news media releases? Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. I mean, were they using them pretty consistently?
Yeah, my recollection is yes. I mean, this was obviously a major event for that media market, and they were using information from the releases, and I know the communications team was in constant contact with reporters to make sure and provide timely updates. Yeah.
At some point, can you give us a feel for how you fed and provided hotels or resting places for the crews? Obviously, they're probably working longer hours than they normally would to get the restoration done, but at some point, everybody has to rest and eat.
You want to take that?
Yeah, I can take that one. Thank you for the question, Commissioner Ziegler. So we facilitated all of our contracted crews out of one facility called our Bergdahl Training Center. So any vegetation crews or any lineman crews came in the morning and staged, and that's where we served them breakfast. Then we served them dinner to go and gave them plated lunches to take with them. And then when they came back in an evening for a meal there. So we catered all that food and brought that into that location to provide for the contractor folks. Our internal crews, we had them at the normal operating centers, and we fed those crews as well with just meals provided by local restaurants as well. Lodging was, with this amount of contractor crews coming in, was kind of difficult, but we have enough hotel accommodations in the area that we were able to find hotel accommodations. Now, I will say we started moving them out into Henderson, Kentucky, and Owensboro, Kentucky, as we started ramping up to around those 1,000 contractors. But we have an internal group that facilitates and coordinates hotels up front prior to the storm occurring, having contractual agreements, and then calling upon them when we need them to, fulfill those room needs.
We wanted to share some of the feedback that we received in the days following the event wrapping up as well. Here's a sample of comments from Warwick and Posey County EMA officials, one fire department, and happens to be the mayor of Mount Vernon here. We were hearing real-time feedback not only from local leadership, but one of the other pieces we haven't really touched on yet today is we were also hearing real-time feedback from key accounts, right? So we had, some issues with schools. We had some issues with different facilities around the region that were important that we were getting real-time feedback, and then on the back end also got some positive feedback for the interaction to get those issues addressed. Again, our trained emergency operations process, I think worked pretty well as our internal team calls allowed us to communicate and act on these localized issues that we were getting from these, getting from key accounts as well as from local elected officials. The interaction between the various internal business function and operations throughout the event allowed us to communicate with support agencies as well, like the Red Cross, who became active in the community warming centers once they were stood up.
Mike, do you have any data from the Red Cross as to how many of the customers actually utilize some of the warming centers or any overnight accommodations that were provided by non-for-profit or faith-based groups?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't have that data today. I'd be happy to get that to you. I know that was a major concern, especially in the early hours of the event, as we were standing up several of these centers. The media was helpful in reporting where those were. Anecdotally, I can say that I was a little bit surprised at the perhaps underutilization. I thought there would be more. I remember the initial 24, 48 hours not having just a lot of, especially overnight accommodations, but we will get you, because we have that. I just don't have it with me today.
And if you or Shane could, how did the gas system perform during this period of time?
Yeah, I guess I'd be pleased to say that we really didn't have issues on the gas side throughout this event.
Yeah, that's correct.
So as we begin to get to the end of the event and talk about a few more lessons learned, as the event wrapped up and some of the area began to return to normal operations, we did continue communications with our customers. Our teams visited these warming centers on the Thursday, Friday, as the event was winding down to thank volunteers. Shane and other management visited the crews throughout, really, but again at the end to thank them for safely working to restore power. Shane mentioned a couple of the fairly minor incidents, but of course, safety is always the top issue that we focus on, and so the constant interaction with the crews, thanking them, communicating with them, I think that went fairly well. We again turned to social media to thank our mutual assistance partners and companies that supported our expanded workforce. We continue to provide media interviews, especially with local television, because even as power perhaps was fully restored or 99.9% restored, the destruction that you've seen on some of the previous photos remain kind of top of mind for the press. On the slide here on the right, you'll see we did a couple of things to try to thank our customers and the community here. We had a full-page ad in the local Evansville Courier and Press that ran a couple of times. Again, really thanking our customers for their patience. We know that was a really difficult time, especially for those that saw multiple day outages. Again, anecdotally, we did get a lot of thank yous, and we wanted to make sure and express that back to the community. We also penned an editorial that ran in the Courier and Press that went through some of the statistics, storm statistics, and again, thanked the community for going along this journey. We know they didn't want it. We didn't want it either, but we did our very best to communicate every step of the way, and obviously, I think our crews did just tremendous work to get power on in pretty short order.
What kind of lessons learned did you take from the storm and your response to it? Things you might do differently in a similar situation, things like that?
That's a great segue into our next slide. Thank you for that. So just to summarize, Winter Blair has proven to be the most impactful winter storm since the 2009 ice storm. We did face similar challenges and customer impacted compared to that storm. However, we managed to complete this restoration in 5 days compared to 8 days previously. However, we are committed to improving our restoration processes moving forward, and some of the key takeaways from our after-action review include enhancing our outage tracker map and power alert notifications for more precise updates. We are going to change our outage tracker, going to a new platform by April of this year. We also want to do a better job of ensuring communication on customer-owned equipment to expedite their restoration efforts.
Shane, can you elaborate on the map? Because and it's not just with you. We've seen this before with other utilities. The outage map is very frustrating. When customers look at the outage map and they see that it doesn't show an outage and their lights are out, or vice versa. Can you kind of explain that? What's going on with that, and what the solution is for you long term?
Well, I'm not the IT guy to give the great solution, but I can tell you that for this particular outage, we had a few outage tracker issues. One was when the storm first happened, everybody was getting on there to see what the information is for a return to service time frame. And it just overloaded the system, slowed it down to where, it was very slow on the response time. That happened on Sunday evening, I think. And we ended up adding some horsepower to it, or if you will, some servers and capacity, to where we were able to accommodate all that additional influx onto the outage tracker. And that took about 3 hours to do. The other issue we encountered later in the week on Tuesday, I believe, is that for some reason the outage map was not showing some of the outages anymore. And I can't get into it technically what they found, but they did find an issue and resolve that within like 6 hours after finding the issue. Both of those speak to what, we're trying to continually improve on that, and I think going to this new platform that CenterPoint in Houston has adopted will help improve that as well. From the power alert service notification, we did hear that, customers were receiving notifications that they had an outage and they didn't, or if they were back on and they weren't. And, after the restoration process, we dug pretty deep into that and tried to figure out why. And what we found it wasn't widespread. It was limited to a small percentage of customers, but they were mapped to the wrong transformer in our system. So we have gone through that, scrubbed that, and got them mapped to the right system going forward. So hopefully that helps reduce some of that. some of the wins that we had, I feel like we want to build upon what we felt would work well. So including pre-staging crews for the ice storm events and simultaneously performing damage assessments and restoration work at the same time, we believe that helps streamline our overall response. The other thing we thought we feel like we've gotten positive feedback on was our ETA guidance, our ETR guidance, estimated time of restoration. We kind of suppressed the alerts in outage tracker after we knew it was coming, so it wouldn't give people false indications. But within 24 hours, we were able to give a global estimated return. Within 48 hours, we were able to give a regional estimated return of restoration. And then within 72 hours, we went down to the event level at the person's residence. So we tried to improve on that so people knew, relatively quickly when their power would be restored. That's it for our presentation. Happy to entertain more questions.
Well, Shane and Mike, you both mentioned how you might wind up modifying your vegetation management based on some additional modeling, satellite imagery. And I'm just making a global observation. The General Assembly, through the 5-pillar statute, has the first 3 characteristics, and not in any particular weighted order, because I think it says to not do that. Reliability, resiliency, and stability are all in that umbrella. You mentioned that the difference between the 2009 incident and the 2025 was of an 8-day restoration. I don't remember the 2009 one. I wasn't here at that point in time. There's only one of us up here on the bench that was, and he was asking some questions. But was that a similar event in scale, the number of customers?
Yes. I don't know the number off the top of my head, but I think it was in the low 70,000 that was impacted during that time back in the 2009 ice storm.
So anecdotally, you're saying that there was, a 30 or 40% increase in restoration time if you went from 8 to 5 days generally. But also one of the problems with this event was that it wasn't everybody got hit on Sunday. There was outages occurring every day because of the weight on the lines, correct?
That is correct. The majority, we peaked on Monday morning, but we were still experiencing outages throughout that week.
So somebody who was out on Monday could have been restored, but somebody who was on service on Monday might be out on Wednesday.
Yes, we actually did a calculation and came up with that 100,000 customers, or 100 customers were out. 100. We had. Let me say that differently. We had 100,000 outages through the course of those 5 days. Some of those were because customers experienced multiple outages due to, like you just said, vegetation falling and taking them out twice, and some of them were due to isolation just to do the repair work. But we did have over 100,000 outages over that 5 days.
Well, as I kind of mentioned in my questioning too, I would be very interested when you get the data on mutual assistance, how much those additional crews were able to handle, and who participated in that. I know that in the moment, you're not thinking about necessarily aggregating data for regulators, but it would be very, I think, informative for us in understanding that as time goes on. Commissioner Bennett.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mike, everybody go home safely?
With the exception of the
One
two
gentleman or
the
lady
two
that-
examples that Shane, everybody returned to their families.
Congratulations on that.
Yeah.
Your customers, I'm sure some customers are, it was a financial hardship. Has this been reflected in any of your repayments or billings or collections issues? Did this create a short-term collection issue, and if so, what might have you done about that?
Well, I think somewhat coincidental to the timing of the storm, we had just rolled out a new customer assistance fund that provided another level of financial support to customers who are struggling. And so coming out of this storm would have been near the peak of when we actually got a lot of applications for that. I don't know that it was attributable to the storm. I think it was also that period of time, that early January and then again early February, there were two significantly cold weather events that obviously drove consumption higher, which is a challenge as well.
Well, thank you. Thanks for coming today. I know I appreciate it, and I'm sure my colleagues do too. But thank you,
Commissioner Freeman.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I thought I'd just dive back into the weeds again. Looking back on this, are you able to do any type of evaluation relative to the stage of completion in your current TDSIC plan? Do things like this, how do they factor into the development of your next plan?
That's a great question. Yeah, I think, and that's what I was trying to illustrate a little bit with the poles and transformers, the small percentage that we had. We had less than 1% of both of those that we had to replace during this storm. So we do believe the efforts we put forward with the TDSIC program is moving forward. And I do believe that going forward on our next phase of TDSIC, we'll continue to look at that from the impacts of this storm as well.
Mr. Chairman, if I may.
Anthony.
On page 13, it says the addition of the ETR to the outage map was well received by customers. What do you base that on, and what efforts has the company made to get feedback from customers following the event?
Yeah, so I think initially, Shane described how those were kind of phased back in as we were able to better predict the ETRs. I'm not aware that we've done any direct survey work with customers on this. It's more anecdotal feedback that we've gotten either through social media, through some interviews that we saw in the local press where customers were asked about this. And so it's more anecdotal stories, I guess I would say, that we've got.
And on a different matter, you talked about elevating this from a level 3 storm to a level 2. I'm interested in a little more detail on what that entailed, and I assume there's such a thing as a level 1, and what would have had to have happened to get to that level.
Sure, I can try to answer that one. So a level 4, we have a levels 1 through 4. Level 4 is kind of a blue sky day normal procedure. Level 3 is where we have multiple outages across our service territory, but we can handle it within our own means typically. Level 2 is when it's getting widespread, and we will have to go out for additional outside resources. And level 4 is where, maybe I shouldn't say it this way. Level 1 is where shit hits the fan, and we've lost, almost the entire service territory where we're really going to have to figure out how we handle that.
Do you recall if the 2009 storm was level 1 or level 2?
I don't. I wasn't in this role at that time, and I'm not even sure if we had those levels at that time as well. But we can go back and look and get back to you on that.
That's fair.
Anything else from the bench? OUCC, any other questions? CenterPoint, we very much appreciate you coming in today, making the presentation. As bad as this event was, I know that there was good things that did happen, but there's also lessons learned. You do have some action steps that you said that you've identified. I like the idea of you integrating that vegetation management plan with the satellite and the additional modeling, because there are different kinds of trees and shrubs and bushes and whatnot, different cycles, and if you can mitigate some of that during the course of your regular vegetation management plan that preempts some of the damages to take place. I know that you're thinking about that reliability and resiliency at the same time. So those are good steps. I think Commissioner Freeman's invocation on the TDSIC side is a good one as well. And any insight that you can give us on mutual assistant, if there's anything that can be learned lessons-wise on, if the call call people in sooner, or whatever, and how those communications work. And then additionally, on communicating with customers. I know it's very difficult when you lose electricity. Who's going to get the messages? So we're always interested in hearing any kind of insight and innovation that you may have with respect to communicating with customers, and I know that you're sensitive about that. So with that, thank you very much for coming in today, and we appreciate the presentation.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much.